When working on a jazz blues, it can be helpful to have some note choices available to you and mapped out so that you can navigate the changes efficiently and well. So in today's video, I'm going to go over some common scales that can help you get started not only with mapping out a jazz blues, but conceptualizing jazz language. Let's jump right to it. What's up, Brent here from LearnJazzStandards.com, which is a blog, a podcast, and videos all geared towards helping you become a better jazz musician. Make sure you subscribe at the button below and hit that bell notification button if you have never done so before. Now, quick disclaimer on scales. If you've been following me for a while, you know I always preach this. Scales are not necessarily a means to start improvising, but they are a good way to start navigating chord changes and knowing what note choices are available to you. I like to call them pitch collections. So the different categories of scales I want to talk about today is, number one, those that just map out the chord changes. And if we can start connecting them together efficiently, we'll start being able to have some choices available to us when we go out to start improvising, which will help us be technically proficient. And the second category of scales has to do more with conceptualizing jazz blues language so that we can start to get some of those sounds to come out in our playing. So with that being said, let's jump right to it. So the first scale I want to go over is the Mixolydian scale, or the Mixolydian mode, which is great to play over dominant seventh chords. And as we know, jazz blues has tons of dominant seventh chords. So we have, I'm doing this in the key of B flat. So B flat, E flat 7 is the 4 chord, back to B flat 7, back to the 4 chord. We have our diminished, sharp 4 diminished, back to the 1 dominant 7th, and then another dominant 7th, a secondary dominant 6th chord, and then a 2 and a 5, that's a dominant 7th chord, and a 1. So lots of dominant 7th chords in here. So Mixolydian is a great way to do that. This is pretty basic. A lot of people know this one, but it's basically, you can think of it as a major scale, but with a flat 7. So for B flat, it's... right? So just a major scale with a flat 7 in it, that spells out the dominant 7th chord, right? Apply the same thing over the E flat 7. Right? But we want to make this musical, of course. So this is where you really have to start exploring things for yourself and creating music with it. Right? So you have to start just coming up with musical ideas. Now I'll talk a little bit in a second how to start making this stuff musical, but keep that in mind as I go along through this. The next basic scale that you need to know is the whole half diminished scale, because we do have that sharp 4 diminished that happens in, that's the real gospel-y, bluesy aspect of a jazz blues that we need to cover, right? So, of course, there's the half whole diminished. So in the case of, in the concert B flat, we have an E diminished 7th chord, right? So a whole half diminished, it's just whole steps and half step intervals would be... right? So that's whole half diminished. However, I prefer to think about diminished, especially when it comes to improvising, as an arpeggio first. So, you know, so we have the arpeggio, and the way you can start applying other notes outside of the arpeggio is simply thinking either a half step below or a half step above each chord tone in that arpeggio. So if we have an E diminished, right? So it's a tricky chord to improvise over, but I like to think starting with that chord tones, the arpeggio, and then just whole step above or half step below, and those are basically the scale tones in between. The last basic scale to know for mapping it out is the Dorian mode. Now, there's a 2 chord in here with the classic 2-5-1, right? Back into the 1 chord at the end of the form. So we have C minor 7, F7, B flat 7, and that C minor 7 is where we can apply Dorian ideas. Now, Dorian, for those of you who aren't familiar, it's just the second mode of the major scale, and the way I like to think about Dorian is simply playing a major scale, but starting on the second tone. So if we have C minor 7 rather, and we are going to play the second tone of a major scale, that means we are in B flat, right? B flat is the 1 chord. So we have a B flat major scale, but we're starting on the second tone. Right? So the tricky thing here, of course, is with scales, with zero context of chord progressions, you're not really going to make musical ideas. So you can... Right? I mean, all that is good and stuff, but obviously that chord is going somewhere. Right? So you want to start being able to connect chords together. That's the most important thing, and that's why scales alone aren't enough. So those are the basic ones. Here's what I call a scale map, which connects all of these scales that I just talked about together using voice leading, meaning the nearest chord tone from one chord to the next. And when we are able to do this, especially in all 12 keys, this will really help you be proficient in just nailing and outlining all the note choices available to you over a 12-bar blues form. So take a listen to this. So the next category of skills I want to go over are more about conceptualizing jazz blues language, and especially on the bluesy side. I talked about in another video about the 3 pillars of jazz blues language. I'll go ahead and link that up in the cards above, and you can check that out. So this is really just focusing on the blues side of the language, and these scales are, a lot of you will know them, but they are just classic and important to know to start conceptualizing language. So let's dig right into those. So first we have the minor pentatonic scale. So if we're again in concert B flat, we have, and that's pentatonic, so only 5 notes, but of course important to play in 2 octaves at least. Of course, you play an instrument like me, like a guitar, then you want to play it in different positions on your instrument, all that good stuff, right? So be able to play that, that's simply outlining some of those bluesy notes, right? Specifically, that sharp 9 right there really gives us that bluesy sound. I think most people know this one, and so this isn't a new concept here, but it's an important one to know. Now, the next scale I'll talk about is the blues scale, which, to be honest with you, I don't really believe in, because the blues scale is really just a minor pentatonic scale with a sharp 4 in it. Right? Now, of course, this is a great one and really popular one and fun one to get beginners into because it has that, we call it the blue note. Right? You can make really bluesy sounding stuff very easily with that. So disclaimer there, it's really just the minor pentatonic with a sharp 4, but it can be helpful, especially if you're more of a beginner or you're a teacher teaching beginners. It can help introduce these sounds into their playing. All right, the final one I want to discuss is the major pentatonic, and that sounds like this. Right, so it's a pentatonic scale, but now we're outlining some different notes here. So the main one, of course, is that major third. Otherwise, right, if we're just playing the minor pentatonic, we're not hearing that third, which really is what outlines those changes very well. So if we start combining the major pentatonic and the minor pentatonic in our improv, we can really start hearing the chord changes come out and hit some of that bluesy sound. Right, so there I was adding some major thirds and that sharp 9 in there, and you know, it sounded bluesy. You could kind of hear me go to the 4 chord there. So that's a way to get started, is start combining the major pentatonic and the minor pentatonic. Now, again, these are just scales. This is not how we make music. These are just ways to start mapping things out and conceptualizing some ideas. So if you have not already, please do sign up for my absolutely free masterclass called Boost Your Jazz Blues. It's just 40 minutes of value to really show you how to go beyond the blues scale and beyond the minor pentatonic and beyond copy and paste licks and really start digging in and start developing blues mastery, which I believe is going to give you an unfair advantage for all of the rest of jazz improv. So go ahead and sign up for that, boostjazzblues.com. I'll also link that up as well in the card and in the description below for checking that out. Here's what I want to hear from you today. What scales would you apply over a jazz blues? Let's fill up as many ideas as possible. I know that these are not the only ones. There's plenty of other fancy things we can do with chord scale theory over a jazz blues. So play your part. Leave me a comment below. Would love to see you fill those up. Hey, make sure you smash that like button for me on the video below for the YouTube algorithm to have favor on a poor jazz musician like me. And make sure you subscribe to the show, to the channel. Would love to have you part of the community. I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching and happy practicing. Cheers.